Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure for me to welcome you at this last session of our AI Tech and Policy talks of this year. For those of you who are not familiar with our AI-TPT webinar series, AI-TPT is an initiative that we launched at the Digital Law Center, which basically wants to bring together experts in various facets of AI tech and policy with the ambition to foster an interdisciplinary dialogue about these issues. And today we have the great pleasure to welcome as our distinguished speaker for this session, Professor Sébastien Marcel, who is the head of Biometrics Security and Privacy Group at idiap Research Institute. And you have a wonderful picture in the background, first page of the PowerPoint presentation of Sébastien Marcel of idiap Research Institute, which is located, as you can see, in the Swiss Alps with wonderful snow that we're actually still waiting in reality, but a very well-established research institute with which we have the privilege to cooperate on various facets. Sébastien Marcel is the director of the Swiss Center for Biometrics Research and Testing. He's also adjunct professor at the Faculty of Law, Criminal Justice and Public Administration at the University of Lausanne, and he will speak, as you can see, about the very hot topic of spoofing and deepfakes in biometrics and the risk of identity theft. In the light of a presentation that will be shared subsequently, and also, as we will see and hear, also on the basis of a short video. As usual for our sessions, we will have then the pleasure to give the digital floor to commentators who will comment on the presentation in an informal manner. And today we are very pleased to welcome Irmak Erdoğan, who actually, as well as our second commentator, is part of our community, Digital Law Center community. Irmak Erdoğan is presently postdoctoral researcher at the Center for IT and IP Law, CiTiP, of KU Leuven University, and she presented last year her research at our Digital Law Research Colloquium. So it's great to have her back today. Thanks for joining us, Irmak. And also a great pleasure to welcome back Professor Sérgio Branco, who joined us from Brazil, and who also mentioned that today is banking holiday day today. So thanks very much to him for joining us, even though he should have taken free time today. And Sérgio Branco is a dear friend and colleague with whom we've worked a lot, including in our Digital Law Summer School. He is co-founder and director of the Institute for Technology and Society of Rio de Janeiro, ITS Rio, and it's a great pleasure for us to welcome him today. And after the comments made by our commentators, we will open the floor for an open discussion with the participants who can, of course, raise their hands or also make comments by using the chat function that they certainly familiar with on the Zoom application that we're using today. Please note that the session is recorded and that we will make it available online on the website of our Digital Center so that people could watch it subsequently. And let me now turn to our speaker and give the floor to Sébastien Marcel for his presentation. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very fruitful session.
Thank you very much, Jacques. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be able to present some of the aspects of my work here in the institute in this beautiful Alps region, right in the mountains. And indeed, we start to have snow, so hope to see you soon. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk about spoofing and deepfakes, what it is, very quickly, and what is the relationship and the vulnerability or threat in the biometric setup. Which is mostly the issue of identity theft. So I will just give a quick overview of our activities, then I will talk about the topic of today with an introduction, present some examples from the reality. I will go back to science a little bit, and the artifacts. I will give some examples, maybe show you a video, and to conclude, I will just explain you how we detect those forms of attacks. So in a nutshell, the biometrics security and privacy group here at idiap works on signal processing and machine learning for biometric recognition, so developing algorithms to recognize people through their face, their vein, their voice, their ECG signal, their whatever. And we also are interested into attribute recognition, which is recognizing other things from the same data, like gender, estimating the age, and other things, which is not identity specific, but other forms of information. Then, therefore, we're also looking at all the security aspects, and this will be one of the main part of the talk today. So this is what we call presentation attacks, but there exist also forms of attacks, such as the morphing attacks and the deepfakes we are going to talk very quickly about today. We're also interested into the privacy aspects, so how to protect the biometric data, since this is sensitive data, and here we develop algorithms that we refer to as tablet protection algorithms that make sure that data is transformed in such a way it is irreversible and unlinkable across applications. Of course, we're working on multimodal combinations of all of this. We're also interested into more general AI in responsible the creation of responsible data sets, since we need in AI a lot of data, and since the data we are using our data from people, we need to take care about where the data is coming from, what we do with the data. So today we're going to talk about biometrics vulnerabilities. Here you have the big picture diagram of what is a biometric system. So a system aims to recognize identities. Typically, the way it works, you have a sensor, typically a camera, that take an image, that transform the data and send the biometric data digitized to a module called feature extractor. Feature extractor generates biometric features which are either stored in the database for later recognition purpose, and or sent at test time to a comparator that compares it to the previous biometric feature stored in the database during enrollment time that we call biometric reference. And then the outcome of this comparison is typically a score that we use to take a decision, either this is the right person or not. Typically, it can be a binary decision if you have a verification system, or it can be a multi-class problem if we have identification systems. So all the circles you see here are vulnerabilities that have been identified in the biometric system. Many of them are not typical than a biometric system. They are the same vulnerabilities that you can see in any information system, except the number one. Number one is the specific vulnerability that is often referred as a direct attack. It is an attack that is performed at the sensor level. So here the point is not to tamper the device, but to present a fake to the sensor. All right. And in the field, we call this a presentation attack, because we present something, that an artifact, to duplicate and to eventually mimic someone and to take his identity. When we are aiming to detect this kind of attacks, we refer to as presentation attack detection. So today we are mostly going to talk about the attack number one. The others is not for today, that's for next time. Right, so the bit of terminologies again. So we refer to as presentation attack instrument, the specific artifact that is used to perform presentation attack. For example, a 3D mask, a gummy fingerprint, but it also includes other things such as a dead body part. So because biometrics, you can unfortunately alter a body in specific ways to use that part of the body to perform presentation attack. Then when you have something which is not an attack, we refer to as a bona fide presentation. So that's a normal presentation of someone who is not, who wants to be recognized and interfere. And these definitions come from the standards, so the ISO standards. So why is it an important subject? So why that? Because actually presentation still nowadays is not a new problem. There's more than 10 years that I'm working on this, but still nowadays presentation attacks pose a major threat to many biometric systems, because the attack you perform is external to the system. It's an attack you perform at the sensor level, so it doesn't require elaborated skills such as being an engineer or really a skilled hacker to perform an attack. Basically, you can cook your attack in your at home and then come and present that attack, this artifact to the sensor. And you also don't need to have good knowledge about the internal working of the system. So basically, it's kind of easy to create a presentation attack. So we are going to see examples from the reality. So here, this is the first one. So here, there's a case of a robbery in the US where this guy used a silicon mask to rob a bank, actually several banks, rob several banks. 2010. Another case, very famous one in immigration, that you have this young guy that managed to board a plane in Hong Kong to fly to Vancouver with the mask of that old person on his face. So he managed to board with this mask, and later on during the flight, he was arrested. Smartphone unlock, 2011, there was already some face unlock before the iPhone, right, iPhone X. It has actually managed to, it was demonstrated that it can be attacked very easily by presenting a fake, a picture in front of the sensor. So 2017, iPhone 10 was a kind of a game changer, introducing a new sensing technology that allows to be more robust to spoofing or presentation attacks. Right, fingerprints. So these are examples for face. Fingerprints are the same too. Fingerprint was introduced in 2013 on the iPhone, right? It was introduced before, but on the iPhone and used by the wide number of people. It was already at that time, and it was demonstrated it could be spoofed, and it just was, the recipe was published in less than 48 hours on the internet. The same team as actually that managed to spoof the iPhone has demonstrated they can spoof also iris recognition on a Samsung Galaxy S8 device by printing also a piece of paper from an eye and plus adding a contact lens to create some reflection in order to spoof the system. So just examples from the reality. So you see, well, not so far from what you can see in sci-fi movies or the, you know, and so CSI movies, for instance. That's not very far. So here I'm going to present examples of presentation attack instruments that have been demonstrated in the literature to be effective, and I'm going mostly to focus on face because this is mostly our expertise there. So just as a side note, right, this is public information, but don't use it to commit crimes, of course. So we categorize the presentation attacks in three main categories. We have, so for face, so we have photograph or recordings. The attacker is going to take a photo or recording from someone, is going to replay it to the biometric system. We can use also synthetic biometric characteristics. So here we are going to generate a synthetic model and present it to the recognition system. That could be a deepfake, for instance. We have the self-modification. So the attacker is going to alter physically or digitally his own biometric characteristic to mimic the target, right? And that's it. So there are three different categories. And we are going to see examples. The most basic one is the printed attack. It's very old. It dates from 2009 or even before. When researchers have shown that you can bypass face recognition by just showing a piece of paper in front of the camera. That demonstrated to work on commercial systems. It was extended later to performing a presentation attack with a screen. So you display or you replay a video on the screen that you a large screen or small screen that you show in front of the camera. So here, for instance, you have the camera here on the smartphone here, which is watching the screen there, and then you do the presentation attack by displaying something on the screen. And you can also bypass face recognition with that. A bit of lag with my computer, I'm sorry. Here we go. Yep. So here, so there's a little quiz. So these are, I'll go fast on this one. So these are images captured from that setup, for instance. So here you have this camera that sees an object there. And the question is which one is real or which one is fake, right? So if you look for a while, you maybe inspect and decide, okay, this one is fake too, and this one is maybe real, this one too. But actually, they're all fake. All of them are fake. The only thing that changes between those is that the background on which the image was taken is uniform there and complex there. And then when we perform the attack, either we use a piece of paper, or we use a mobile phone, or we use a larger screen, which makes a better quality of an attack. Second level of attack, it is paper. So you can also make paper attacks, 3D masks in paper. That's not very effective to do impersonation, right? But it's quite effective to evade the system, to do obfuscation. And you can do it for cheap. Now there are websites when you can print, fold, cut, and glue your own mask in paper. Cheap, not very effective for impersonation. Another way is to also print a 3D mask, and you also have services on the internet that exist. So you upload 2D pictures and they're going to generate a 3D mask for you. And then this 3D mask will have the appearance, I mean, it's an estimate of the 3D shape, and it's not really the 3D shape of your real identity. It's just have the texture and the appearance, and it can be sufficient to spoof 2D face recognition, but not 3D. It's a bit more expensive than the paper. The advantage is that from a detection point of view, is that there is no, since this is rigid, there is no facial movement that can be detected, right? So nowadays, this kind of attacks will be easy to detect. Right, I have a problem with my screens. Yeah, okay. So you can have variants of those masks. So before we had plain masks, right? Completely plain. And now we can have masks also with the holes in the eyes and the nose, so you can breathe actually. And then you can see through it. So you can do eye blinking, for instance. So detectors that would check for eye blinking, then you can bypass it with this kind of masks. So here you have these previous masks. I have issue there with my screen. You have previous masks with the holes. This is another generation of masks with the color, which has a bit less vivid, but more accurate in terms of 3D shape. So we can have different kind of configurations. To give you an idea of where we are at the level of realisticness of rigid masks, this is it. So at the moment, so it's possible to order on the internet masks like this. These ones are made of plastic, hyper realistic. It's very impressive when you hold a mask like this in your hand. So these are masks we have here in the lab. They are hyper realistic. They are also very expensive, as you can see. And these are new masks on which we are working at the moment. So this can really kind of a sneak peek. Right, then another level of attack, presentation attacks with the masks, is changing the material. We have seen paper, we have seen this resin, we have seen plastic, but we can also use silicon. Silicon, the main advantage is that it's flexible, right? Also in near infrared, it has the same texture and skin, right? So it looks the same. And also it absorbs heat very quickly. So you can heat it up either with an external source of heat, or if you wear it, it's going to heat up very quickly. So even thermal imaging will be could be fooled. So that's really interesting from a point of view of the attacker, and from the point of view of the defense, well, that's a bit more difficult, very challenging. So we have generic masks like this, so which are not to do impersonation, mostly obfuscation. If you want to go and rob a bank, for instance, right? So it will cost not much, $800, you can buy that on the internet. Now, if you want to create a custom mask for a specific person, well, that will be a bit more complicated, but not impossible. This is something we have done with a couple of data subjects. So we have here a couple of almost 20 masks of different custom masks of different persons. You can do it from a raw 3D scan plus 2D pictures, and then with that, you can ask someone to manufacture a silicon mask. This silicon mask look like this. So typically, this is almost an artist that does it. They work for special effects. So they make first a raw 3D mask, then they use that to make a mold. Then they are going to, from the mold, they are going to pour the silicone inside. They are going to peel the mask off, and then they are going to paint it. Right, so all the teeny details on the final mask at the end are just obtained by painting, mixing paint and silicone again to get all the texture. These masks are actually quite effective. They are quite realistic. They are not as effective as simpler attacks, unless we can believe. But it's really impressive. Once I have a video here, I can show you.
Can you guess who this is? I bet you can.
I don't know if you saw the video or if you hear the people speaking. So this is someone, a colleague in the US.
Can you guess who this is? I bet you can.
He was wearing one of our first 3D silicon masks, but the first trial, the cheeks were a bit thick. But it's still very impressive because you can see the lip movements, right, at the same time, because the mask is actually sticky to your face. It sticks to your face, so it moves with your facial expressions. These masks are quite interesting because we can change the eyeballs too. We have holders for the eyeballs. We can remove the eyes. We can change the eyeballs to different type of materials. Wait a second. So the masks. Another form of attack, which is now in the self-modification category, is makeup. Makeup can be used. So I'm not talking about prosthetics. I'm talking of just makeup. Makeup can be used to change your appearance in such a way that either you cannot be recognized or you can even be aged. We have made experiments. We can age people quite a lot and such that they are not going to be recognized anymore. Or you can also, if you're very skilled, you can change your appearance to look like someone else. In this particular example, you have this guy here that managed to use makeup so he can change your appearance to look like characters from the very famous series, Game of Thrones, for some of you that know the series. So it's very realistic. Also, the problem is very problematic because all the motion you can, this is a real skin, real person, just altered with makeup, right? So how do you decide, how do you detect the makeup? How do you decide that there is a specific makeup that is used to with a wrong intention to change your identity, and that is not makeup that you will use naturally, that anyone, almost anyone can use makeup for regular reasons. So it's a very difficult problem actually. So here's an example, as I was saying, where you use makeup to age that person. So this person, this man and this woman have been aged just by using makeup. That's quite impressive. And after this point here, those faces cannot be recognized to this face anymore. Another level of attack, which is a specific form of attack, which is a morphing attack. This is more specific to the identity document world, document identification. It was demonstrated a couple of years ago in 2014 that it's possible to morph two identities, two faces digitally to create one single face. And that if you inject that face into the manufacturing process of digital documents, of like passports or other identity documents, that document, official document, can allow two persons to travel and be recognized against the single face stored in the document. So you can imagine the threats it represents. So this is called a morphing attack. So basically you have two different persons that can morph together, that you have this picture. And if you take another picture of the attacker, another picture of the target, those two persons can be recognized against the morph. If you put that morph in a passport, on an identity document, then those two persons can travel with the same passport. Yet another, and will be the last one, the deepfakes. Deepfakes is a vast subject. We can talk about, I could talk about it for hours. Unfortunately, I don't. So deepfakes is a contraction of deep and fake, and from deep learning. So these are using a bunch of technologies from AI called generative adversarial models to generate synthetic data, and more particularly synthetic faces. When you do that, you can do many things. One of the most threatening one is that you can create face swaps, right? So you can take the video of someone and put the face of someone else on that person. Okay. So you can, like this, you can you can modify the content of a video or an image or a video, and then you can take that image or that video and perform a presentation attack with it. Or you can also inject it into the system and adjust for biometrics. But you can imagine all the possible complications that you may have in with criminal activities I mean, there is a lot of issues with revenge porn, for instance, disinformation. That's really a big challenge for the police forces in general. So how to have tools that can detect a material if it has been altered with a deepfake, and if it has been altered, how, for instance. So here, in what I'm showing here is an example where we have a target face, we have a video of someone, right? The original video. We have the face of someone else and want to put that face on that face here and generate a new video. So now we have a new video, the same the original, except that we fitted that face in there. So you see that the same body here, but it's just that the characteristics of that face are here. And that's so realistic that although it was never trained to see that person facial expressions, when you are going to play the video, you are going to have all the lip movements following the voice. So the voice has not been altered here, but the voice can be altered here too. We can do voice conversion, for instance, to convert the voice from someone to the voice from someone else and create an audio-visual deepfake. But here I'm just illustrating a video deepfake where you just do a face swap. So how do you detect that there have been a face swap, that face has been digitally altered? And you can imagine all the problems that, all the challenges and that are behind these attacks. To conclude, in 3 slides very quickly. So what I presented here is the big picture of a biometric system. You may remember here this big picture over there at the beginning, right? All this, which is here summarized in one box, that one here. So biometric system takes data in and just say accept or reject. So if you take a bona fide data, then for recognition, is going to either match it correctly or incorrectly with what has been enrolled. But if you may present a presentation attack, like a printed attack, for instance, of someone else, well, this biometric system is just going to do its job. It's just going to analyze the face inside and just compares it to something which was stored and say yes or no. It doesn't have the capability to say, oh, yes, this is the right person, but in addition, this is a fake. We need to have an additional component. Generally, this is what we call the PAD submodule, right? An additional component whose job is to say what I get in input is real or fake. Is it normal, bona fide, or is it presentation attack? And then we need to have the 2 modules to work together in order to have a fully secure system. Now, how do we do PAD anti-spoofing? So I'm not going to go through all the possible techniques that exist in the literature. I'm going to give you 3 categories of techniques. So either you have the software-based methods, which typically use the same data that is used to do biometric recognition, like a video camera, but it's going to use the data, analyze the data in a specific, in another specific way, such as analyzing the motion or looking at texture, this kind of things, to discriminate between the bona fide or presentation attack. Or you could have, second case, hardware-based techniques, where you are going to rely on an additional sensor. For instance, you could have an additional thermal camera or thermal sensor that is going to measure the liveness, for instance, of the subject. And that information is going to be used to determine if it is a real or fake. So that's an external additional sensor to the one that is used for recognition. Or you could have a challenge response mechanism, which is a scenario where you are able to have an interaction with the user. For instance, you have a face recognition system plus a speaker recognition system, let's say more a speech recognition system, and you can prompt the user to say something particular that cannot be anticipated. Or you can ask even the person to do something, smile, blink, turn your head, these kind of things. So I think I'm reaching the end now. To conclude, and I'm saying I'm on time, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. So is PAD a solved problem? Not completely. Now we start to see more and more applications, including PAD, for the most basic presentation attacks. So that's a very good sign, but it's not still the vast majority. So, but since it's still easy to perform presentation attacks, this is really a need for the industry to deploy PAD solutions. There is still a bit of lack in the certification schemes that exist. Actually, so far there are mostly 2 certification schemes to assess that commercial systems are robust to presentation attacks, and there is no legal obligation for companies to be certified, let's say, for this kind of security levels. So there is no, maybe of some interest for some measure. But there are certification schemes that exist, FIDO and Android more particularly. So one of the main issues on the research aspect is the generalizations, especially the generalization to unseen attacks. So what happens if someone comes with an attack that I've never seen before, that is a variant maybe of another one, but was never seen before, so the PAD system was not designed for it. So is it going to generalize to a new attack? How can we make things that evolve into time that can generalize to unseen attacks? So as you see, and as you understand, this is really an important and still a growing field of research. There is more and more papers about it. There are 2 reference books, edition 2, I'm a co-author of that one. And actually in a few months, there will be edition 3 that will be published. So thank you for your attention and looking for all your questions.
Thanks very much, Sébastien, for this presentation, which shows the potential, which may perhaps be scary, of the technologies, and also the quite interesting point of certification. I'm sure we'll get back to that in the course of the discussion. I don't know whether there are questions of clarification to be put to Sébastien and Marcel right now. And please do feel free to intervene, knowing that we'll have, of course, time for discussion at a later stage. But if there is no such urgent question, I would now turn to our first commentator, Irmak Erdoğan, who will provide us with a certainly legal perspective based on her own research activities and interests. Irmak, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Marcel. It was a great presentation because you explained everything so simply that even for a person with a legal background, it was easy to see what's going on, and it's scary, as said. And after hearing your presentation, I thought of spoofing as like with this one sentence: fingerprints cannot lie, but liars can make fingerprints. And you actually showed how easy it is to make it. And it's not only about fingerprints, and it's about all biometric data that is in danger. And also you showed the different purposes. It's not only for fraud reasons, fraud reasons for economical concerns, but also to avoid visa regulations and so on. It also reminded me, since I also work on risk assessment tools, that there was a case where a person whose data is profiled and is found to be a risk to fly, he was on a fly list, and he manipulated his data via these techniques, and then he managed to get a flight, and then he overcome the system. So what concerns me is more that this new security paradigm, which tells that you are your own key. So in banks and in all institutions, we see that we use biometric data more and more, and the danger is at stake. That's why I didn't know too much about presentation attack detection tools, but they seem very prevalent and very important because they provide a second layer of protection. And for the regulatory framework part, since I'm coming from a legal background, I would like to maybe talk about a bit relevant framework. You said right now it's not an obligation to have this presentation attack detection tools. And I hope maybe after certification and some process, it will be. But the relevant framework would be, for example, if the banks are using biometric data, and we can talk about within the EU directive on payment services. And this directive actually deploys the notion of double security customer authentication. And it's really not only the banks, also the service providers have to make sure that they protect the biometric data and authentication process. So maybe in this sense, after the certification and all, it could be expected from the banks to use this kind of fake deepfake detection or other detection tools, sorry. And the second part, which could be relevant, is, of course, we are talking about biometric data. For sure, first thing comes to mind is within the EU GDPR. And it requires also, while you are doing your research, and also after we apply tools, or also while collecting biometric data, we have to be careful that it's sensitive data. And just to mention quickly, Article 32, which is obligation of security, and Article 35, obligation to carry out risk assessment while processing data, requires that you have to know what the risks are and what the security measures you are going to take. So in this sense, maybe again, relevantly in the future, it would be the case that the data processors must have these anti-spoofing tools. And you mentioned deepfakes, which is also a very interesting issue, as you said, but for regulators, it's a horrible issue because it tackles so many aspects. It's about trusting government, justice, stability and economy, but not only that, you mentioned image-based assault and revenge porn. And it's intimidation, harassment, all of the things that could be done via deepfakes. But my problem with the regulation is there is also good side of the deepfakes for entertainment purposes, like you change it to do makeup, or for sarcasm, to use criticism against politicians. So in such cases, to fit everything under one roof is almost impossible. And I don't know what you would think about transparency regulations in general. In GDPR, it is more like if we are using anti-spoofing tools, if you are processing data, maybe you have to make the tool transparent. Do you think it would cause security issues while you are doing it for security and you have to disclose your system? And furthermore, now draft AI regulation, for example, foresees another kind of transparency. It says that you have to make know that the human are interacting with AI, and more particularly for deepfakes, Article 52 says for deepfakes, you have to make sure that you tell that it's a deepfake, it's a manipulated content by AI. But I see that for the exemplary cases you gave for the identity fraud, of course, there's no point that no one will say, yes, I'm doing it to fool people. So it doesn't cover everything, and it's impossible to cover everything when it comes to deepfakes. But we rather see the criminalization of the acts, for sexual harassment, the use of sexual harassment reasons. And another problem would be that you mentioned that you can just upload your pictures on That's My Face. And for this company, of course, the company knows that there's a risk that this kind of data could be used, or this kind of manipulated data can be misused. But we cannot really make, what do we do with this company? I mean, we cannot make the company criminally reliable, and we cannot, because the company doesn't have the intent to commit a crime or assist a crime. So we need really further clarifications about how to regulate the responsibility of internet service providers who disseminate this kind of deepfakes, how to regulate the responsibilities to take some safeguards for the ones who create these deepfakes or spoofied data. And then we can maybe have some foreseeability to how to deal with the problems that raise out of it. And my second question is, you had mentioned—
Just a second.
Just a second, sorry. For the first one, what do you think about the transparency regulations for your case, that you are developing something for the sake of security? My second question for you is, how do you develop data sets? Because you mentioned that sometimes you use voice versus face, and how do you make tests, and how do you evolve these use case scenarios, which is really hard to correspond to real-time issues? So I wonder about the technical developing part of these tools, and I really hope that after certification process, these tools would be a part of the security requirements, because it seems that we need a secondary safeguard against deepfakes and all these kind of spoofing attacks. Thank you for your time and for the presentation again.
Thank you for your questions. Do you want me to answer now, or should we take more comments?
No, I think it's good if you can react before we shall move to
all right.
Sérgio
So
Branco.
thank you. You provided enough comments so we can chat for hours again. So I'm going to try to stick to your questions. First, about transparency. So right. So the point is whether obfuscation is good for security. So it depends from which point of view you are looking at it. My point of view, I'm looking at it from a research perspective. So all the work I'm doing, the philosophy or I try to adhere that I adopted many years ago is reproducibility. So reproducible research. So therefore, it means that our work needs to be transparent. Of course, we publish, but we do more than publishing. We share also everything which is required for others to replicate our work. So it means if our published work is a vulnerability assessment of a biometric system, we are going to publish that. We are going to publish the details. We are going to publish the data. We are going to publish the code to do it. Now, it doesn't mean that what we have published is going to be able to be embraced by attackers to attack a bank, because it may take another level of efforts. But when we started to come back to this transparency, when I think it is required, I mean, when I started to work on this more than 10 years ago on these aspects of presentation attack detections, there was a taboo in the industry. So, I mean, everybody knew about the problem, but no one wanted to talk about it, especially the companies. It was really a taboo because they had no solution, or even if that solution, it was too complicated to explain that to their customers. So since there was this taboo, there was a little push for the researchers to work on it. And then we got more and more people to work on it. And because there was more people working on it and disclosing the risks and the threats, now 10 years after, one situation where we have standards, certification schemes, and companies are actually integrating technologies to do anti-spoofing. They might not be old state of the art, but at least there is a move, right? So it's no longer a taboo. So from my point of view, which is a research perspective, pushing for transparency improves security. Okay. First answer to the first question. Second question is respect. So basically your question is, how do we handle data for our research? Since we do research in biometric. Okay, so we have multiple ways to do it. So we need to have biometric data records, more particularly face images of people or voice recordings or whatever. So there are two ways we can get this data. Either we get this data from other researchers that have collected this data, in which case we sign a license agreement with them. So they are the data controller, and they share the data with us, and we sign a license agreement so we can legally use this data, and they transfer this data to us. This is the first thing. When we get this data is pseudo-anonymized. I'm saying pseudo-anonymized because when you get a picture of someone, even if you don't have the name of the person, we cannot claim it's really anonymized, because if you know the person, you will know her name, his or her name, right? So generally, biographic information, such as name, age, these kind of things, is not shared with the data. It's disconnected, right? We may have auxiliary other demographics, such as the age or the gender, or these kind of things, other forms of attributes, but not identify. I mean, person, not the name, not the address, not these kind of things. Of course, that is pseudo-anonymized in all the data sets we get. So first scenarios, we obtain data sets from others. Other case, which is happen very often, is that we collect data ourselves, because we have no other choice, because either the data doesn't exist elsewhere, okay, And then if data doesn't exist, you have no choice. You have to create the data. So you have to collect the data. And so what we have done is that we have adopted that for many, many years, even before GDPR was put in place. So we have a process, we have a review board, a review process internally for all the projects where we need to collect data. So first, when we collect data, we have a consent form which is established, put in place from the beginning, plus a license agreement for the data distribution from the beginning. So from the beginning, we say to people, we call for volunteers, and we tell them, okay, this data is going to be used for this purpose, and this purpose is not going to change. It's going to be enforced by the consent form in the license agreement. And we say from the beginning, we may share this data with others for that use with that license agreement. But if you want if you change your mind, if you want to remove from the data set, you contact that person, you will be removed from the dataset, and will inform others for you to be removed from the dataset. So basically, this is what we put in place to collect data. Now, I'd like to reconnect for deepfakes for good, because you say that deepfakes is bad, but it's also good because you can use it for many applications. And actually, I believe, and this is also something we are working on, is that deepfake technology can be used to create datasets, to replace a dataset from real persons, because this synthetic data is now so good quality, and we can control almost what we want to generate. We could generate data we need for our research projects, okay? And then we won't need any more, or a very small portion of real data, and we won't need to go through the getting consent on these kind of things. And this is not only for research, I mean, from the whole industry, is going to be a challenge, because you mentioned more or less about something about the Artificial Intelligence Act. But when is going to be enforced? What will be this is also a question I ask for lawyers. So what will happen in Europe to a company selling, let's say you have a Russian company that has developed a face recognition technology, which is sold in Europe, that actually use artificial intelligence, which was trained on a huge data set necessarily. So where this data is coming from? Can you guarantee that you obtain the consent, or that you can legally use all the data that's used to train this AI technology? You know, so therefore, being able to create synthetic data could be a good tool to switch and to circumvent legal issues, actually. Hope this answers the question.
Thank you very much. Without taking the floor for too long, I think the discussion about transparency is very interesting, also in the light of, and that was alluded to by you, Irmak, Erdoğan, earlier, in terms of the AI Act and Article 52, and perhaps we can share that, and I can do that right now, to all the way this is taken from a website, because this is still discussed, and perhaps see whether this obligation of transparency is really going to help in any manner, and perhaps that would be a discussion to which we may come later. At this stage, I would suggest, unless anyone would like to react to what has just been said, and perhaps you in particular, Irmak, whether you wanted to briefly react to what Sébastien has just indicated.
Actually, sorry,
yes,
thank you.
Please.
It was really helpful, the answer, also, since we are also sometimes using data sets coming from Hong Kong and so on, and each time we have to think about many things, but synthetic data would be perfect to avoid all kind of thinking process. And I actually also think that transparency in GDPR sense and also security can go hand in hand, as mentioned. And thank you very much for the answers again. And for AI Act, maybe one more thing to say. There are, of course, exceptions, like it doesn't, when we are doing it for freedom of speech, for sarcasm purposes, you don't have to, no one has to say that deepfake is manipulated. Here you have deepfake and manipulated data. And if police is using deepfakes actually to prevent crime or detect crime, it's the same. So this transparency doesn't apply to all situations. And also there is no guideline for how would we achieve that? How do we do it? How should it look like? So, and there is no sanction if no one does it. That's also another problem for the deepfake transparency. And I leave it here, and thank you so much for the answers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing for those of you who have not followed that, there was a recent French decision, to your point, Sébastien, which basically sanctioned Clearview for collecting massive biometric data by this company, Clearview AI, which is quite well known in the ecosystem.
And they get paid?
I'm not sure whether this has already been paid, because the sanction was just decided a few weeks ago, basically. But we'll certainly have to follow that very closely. Let's now turn to you, Sérgio Branco, for your comments, to which perhaps Sébastien would like to react afterwards. But Sérgio, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jacques. It's a pleasure to be here. Last year, I had a chance to comment on the work of the very talented Irmak Erdoğan, who is here now, and now this excellent work from Sébastien and Marcel. So Jacques is always inviting me to comment on very interesting researches, and I'm very grateful for that. Sébastien, I have several comments, and you can feel free to react to any of them as you would like. Okay. So the first thing is you gave us very many examples of the presentation attacks, and but I missed something that it might be helpful to understand your research, which is, do you have numbers like percentages or numbers of how many attacks have been conducted, and how harmful they are? Because we might think that these attacks and these examples you gave are exceptions. So I think it is important to understand in a broad view how harmful they are, or how large they are. So this is the first point, that if you have more information on that, I think it would be nice. The second thing, if we consider all these systems to be weak, full of fragilities, what is the solution? I know this question has no answer, but what is the solution? Because we can assume people in general could go to shops and steal things, but people don't do that usually. Most of the people don't do that, although they could do that, they don't. So you gave us so many examples that seem to be, you invite us to do it at home. Don't commit crimes, but try at home. Let's see.
Never.
No, okay, but you can test yourself. You will see that the system is not 100% trustworthy. So how much do we rely on? How much do we have to rely on people? Otherwise, it's like, well, anybody could circumvent, but the system is not circumvented more often only because people don't do that. But in fact, it is very easy. How easy, in fact, it is to circumvent, to bypass the system. And I think this second question is kind of related to the first point, which is how weak these systems are, and how many information we have on how often they are circumvented, and how big is the problems they might, or they are leading us on a daily basis. The other point that I would like to comment is that I read on the newspaper this week that, if I'm not mistaken, the world has reached 8 billion people this week. At least it was written on the newspaper here in Brazil, that most of people live on countries which cannot be considered fully democratic. So facial recognition on the streets, for example, are very debatable. And at least in Brazil, it's not easy, it's complicated to get to a consensus on if it is a good thing or not a good thing at all. And there are some topics that intertwine with your research. For example, I could mention privacy by design, which is a requirement from the GDPR and also from the Brazilian legislation, the data protection Brazilian legislation. Public safety, which is really connected to a debate in Brazil, because Brazil, unfortunately, is not the safest country in the world. It's far from that. So many people are in favor of facial recognition on the streets because of the high rates of criminality, but many people say that it is also easy to use facial recognition for repression and for authoritarianism in the government. Same thing for protesting. So if most of people live in countries which cannot be considered fully democratic, the threat could come not only from companies, but also from the government. And Irmak mentioned before deepfakes, and of course, we have the correct use of deepfakes for parodies, for example. I don't see it as a problem, but we can have also the use of deepfake to threaten or to endanger democracy, as we have seen in Brazil and other countries. So, of course, I assume that when we look on a case-by-case basis, we can see, well, this use can be considered okay, and this use can be considered unlawful. It will be on a case-by-case scenario. However, do you see regulation coming for the object of your research, and to what extent? Because do you think that governments can try to legislate on a basis saying, look, all of these things are illegal because they can be used for harmful things, uses, and then this would be a danger for lawful, correct, and welcomed uses? Or you see no government regulation coming? I know I come from a legal background like Irmak, so I'm sorry, we are always very interested in regulation. So how do you see regulation on this topic coming from the governments, and how this debate can be put so people can understand the importance of what you were discussing? These are my topics. So Sébastien, feel free to react to them as you like, and congratulations on your research. It's not only very interesting and important, but you present it in a way people can really appreciate, enjoy, and learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all those questions. Many questions indeed. All right, so let's start for the first one. So basically, you are talking about what we call vulnerability assessment. So here there are two things actually you mentioned. There is what is the vulnerability, right, of each of those attacks. So if we take the print or we take the masks, how really is the vulnerability? So here there are two answers to that question. There is the vulnerability we can measure objectively when we perform those attacks ourselves, right? We create artifacts, we measure, and we count how many times an identity which is printed on a piece of paper is actually recognized by a system, that person is enrolled in the system. So this we can do it objectively and measure it, and we can have a precise metric in percentage, like an error rate that represent the vulnerability. So if you get 0, it's that no attacks pass. If you get 100, that all attacks are recognized as someone. So depending on the type of attack and depending on the type of recognition system, the vulnerability percentage is not the same. In general, the attacks such as the prints and the replay are the most effective. You can get with almost any face recognition systems, you can get up more than 80% of attack success rate, and even higher with the most recent technology, facial recognition technologies that are using AI, that are using deep learning technologies. I have an explanation for that I can give you later if you're interested. But this level of vulnerability is not the same, I mean, it's not reached with other elaborated attacks, such as the masks, for instance, the silicon masks, okay, will be more having vulnerabilities around 60%. So actually, you would believe that actually those attacks are more effective, but really they are not, objectively speaking, when you measure them. Now, whether this represents a risk in reality, that's a different story. The risk in reality is that for specific application, right, what is the risk of having a person that will perform one specific form of attack? If I take border control, for instance, I have an e-gate, or even if I don't have an e-gate, but I go to the US and I pass the border control and I have the police officer and I need to put my fingerprint on the sensor. If I put fake fingerprints on the sensor, what is the risk of that? So basically, how many crazy people, how can be crazy people to try to do that? We don't know. In this kind of scenarios, actually, we don't know. We don't have the information. So either because they pass, we don't know, or either they are stopped and we don't know, right? So, so in reality, it's very difficult to know what is the actual risk. There are only informal information from the inside you get when you talk to people from different agencies. For instance, we know that the morphing actually is quite a risk these days. We thought that this was for morphing attacks, getting passports or digital documents which are morphed was a low risk, but actually there are quite a lot. I mean, per year, like even a couple of dozens will be represent a quite risk, because actually you find services on the dark web to do that, right? You can get you can send your pictures and they are going to be manufactured in the same thing that for dark web you can generate deepfake videos to incriminate someone, for instance. So the problem is not the quantity or how risky it is in terms of how many times it may happen or may the attack succeed, is that what will be the impact of that attack if it passes, depending on the application. Of course, the risk of someone stealing my mobile phone to impersonate my face to access my phone, the risk is very low. At least for me, it's big. But no one is going to make the effort and put the effort and energy to create an attack which is good enough to bypass to get access to my information. But to rob a bank or to access to a lot of assets, I may put much more time and energy. So the risk, actually, generally, we quantify it as such. So we have a threat model that for every attacks, we estimate the level of difficulty and the time it will take an attacker to do it. And when we have this, we balance that with the risk of what is protected. And this is up to the application owner, I mean, the service or the government or the agency or the company or the customer which is using that service to decide whether it's safe not to have any protection against those attacks, or if there should be. That's basically it. So for instance, if most of the risk is to very simple attacks, maybe we can just be able to detect simple attacks, but we don't care about detecting silicon masks, because the silicon mask is going to be manufactured and presented, plus the fact that this vulnerability is quite low compared to the others, makes it that it might not be worth it. So there is always a balance to be done at this stage. Okay, so I hope that answered question 1 and 1 bis. There was another question on, so you mix facial recognition in different countries, threat against privacy, and then talking about privacy preservation. So, of course, huge debate. And clearly there are some issues, as you say, the risk against democracy and so on, depending on some countries. Now, there is nothing we can do about what happens in other countries. First point. I mean, I don't think that we can do anything about the regulation in China or any other country. Maybe you can do something in Brazil, we can do something in Switzerland or in Europe, but that's it. Apart from that, I don't think we have we can do anything. We can raise awareness, we can show the way by trying to implement it in our own countries, and then maybe others will follow. But now what we should not have are these are regulations which are so strict that will block, for instance, police forces to use tools as for forensic investigation. Very often in the public there is a belief that there is an automatic system that identifies someone, and then just that you have a cop that will going to arrest someone at home. But actually, this is a lot of labor. I mean, it's not automated. There are some people that use these tools to facilitate to the search in databases, and you have always a manual intervention. You always have forensic examiners that look at the traces before taking a decision, and biometrics is just a tool to speed up a search, for instance. But that's it. There is nothing automatic like this as we could think of in some countries, for instance. So I think that technology should be still kept and considered as a tool. Yes, it should be framed properly, so that that facial recognition public, for instance, if we still want to have it, should be used only by police forces in some specific cases. But we may consider, for instance, to couple that with privacy enhancement technologies, so ways that to protect some form, so other forms to remove some form of information, for instance, or to be able to reveal only the information to some specific authorities that have the right to do it, this kind of things. And there are specific technologies that would allow to preserve the privacy. Now, just as a small parenthesis, this is very interesting debate because it's actually very paradoxal also. We are also in a society where most of the junior, right, and even some of us, we use mobile applications to capture our own faces and put our images on the cloud in different social networks and so on. You even have applications. You were mentioning those beautifying applications, right? You can get to enhance your face. Well, but it's not done locally. I mean, this image is going to be sent to a server somewhere in Russia or where, you don't know what, and used for another purpose. It's going to be repurposed, and you gave your consent for that because you didn't read the terms of service. So you see, we live in a completely paradox where we give a lot of data to do you don't know what, but at the same time we want to be want to make sure that the same data is not used by others for maybe a right purpose. So I think there is a requirement for a lot of awareness and communication and education to the public of what is the data, especially what is biometrics, face recognition, so on. Where is your data? So you understand really what technology does. And I think this is really something important for me. You mentioned deepfakes against democracy, or risk as a democracy. You're perfectly right. I don't know how to regulate that, very frankly. I think that in almost most of the cases, everything you described are crimes, actually. right? So that exist, and the legal framework actually exists generally for those crimes. The problem is that technology allows new ways to commit those crimes. The crimes, I mean, I think they are legally covered in most of the cases, although I'm not an expert, but what is actually missing are tools to detect that a crime has happened, right? When you are a law enforcement agency and you get a trace to analyze, if you don't have the tools, I mean, you just rely on your own bare eyes or maybe some classes you went under, but you don't have the tools because you've never been exposed to this form of deep fake before. If you don't have so state-of-the-art technologies to analyze this content, there is nothing much you can do, right? And the point for a police force is just to be able to analyze the trace and to generate a report for the judge, for instance, or the authority who is going to analyze the case. So I think that in terms of legal framework for everything which is categorized as crimes, I think we are these are mostly tools for mostly missing tools for the forensic world. And how do I see myself the regulation to evolve? Well, I don't know. This is your job, guys. So I'm not a legal expert. I'm just trying to find what works, what doesn't work, and to communicate to you, because you are the one that can push for changing the regulations, and who are the policy makers. So I'm just here to raise awareness about the risk, what is risky, not so risky, what should be done, not done, and help you if you want to understand better, so you can generate regulations which are really to the point.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I can briefly react before giving the floor perhaps to Sérgio or Irmak and opening up the floor for discussion. If I may perhaps express my own opinion on what you just said, Sébastien, I think you have a say, and it's even critical that you have a say in the regulations to come. And that's basically also what we think, why we wanted somehow to open up this interdisciplinary discussions in the AI-TPT, because it's not only up to the lawyers to draft regulations, they have to do it hand in hand with tech experts, so that we're sure to be on the right track. I mean, as we know, there are challenges ahead, but I think it would be important to make sure that tech people do engage, as you do, Sébastien, in these discussions, but also that you do co-draft to some extent and contribute to the drafting itself, not leaving that to lawyers, because sometimes we see that this is not necessarily the best way to proceed. But anyway, thank you very much. Just like a side note on that, but perhaps back to Sérgio to react to what Sébastien just said, and then opening up for a general discussion depending on the comments. And I would invite, while I give it back the floor to Sérgio, to those of you to perhaps already raise your hand or show your questions, or put your questions in writing on the chat function if you have any. Sérgio.
Jacques, I just would like to thank Sébastien, because his answers really shed a lot of light on my questions and my doubts. And I have no further comments. I really agree with you, Jacques, that experts in technology and legal experts should work together, because this is the only way we will reach responsible use and regulation of such technology. So thank you, Sébastien, for your lecture. It was very, very interesting, but also very important. So not only for me, but I'm sure for everybody who is here to understand this fascinating field of research. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any question from the floor, from the audience? I would have perhaps a very brief, because the session has been very intensive, question to perhaps not only to Sébastien, but also to Irmak and Sérgio. about certification. So Sébastien, you alluded to certification in your presentation. This is, I guess, what you refer to, and I'm just showing on the chart. I'm wondering what can be expected in the future. You also mentioned, Sébastien, earlier that perhaps we will have to deal with upcoming regulation and certification schemes in the future, and I would be happy, perhaps as a last round of reaction for this session today, to see what you would think, both first Sébastien and then Irmak and Sérgio, about what may come in the future. Sébastien first.
Yes, so about certification. So the link you shared is a link to an ISO standard. So there is often the confusion between an ISO standard and certification. That's not the same. These are not the same things. An ISO standard is just a document that several parties agreed upon. So they agreed to call a problem like this. They agreed to on a interoperability formats. They agreed on metrics and how to evaluate things. That's it. That's not a certification. A certification is a document which is provided by a recognized authority for a test of a product against a specific protocol or specific standard. So for instance, you can have, and in biometrics, now we have mostly two certification schemes. We have the FIDO Alliance, and you have also Android that derive their own certification program for biometric testing. And they follow, or they got inspired from these standards, ISO standards such as the one you listed there. So it means that they reuse some of the terminology, they reuse some of the metrics. And the way it works, generally, you have a company that wants to be certified, they want to get a stamp and a document from FIDO. So then FIDO doesn't do it, actually. They don't have the operational capability to do it. They cannot take hardware and test it. So they have a list of certified so accredited laboratories. For instance, like us, we are an accredited laboratory. And the company will just sign a contract with the accredited laboratory, send the hardware to be tested against the protocol, and then a report is established and sent back to the agency, the certification agency that deliver a nice piece of paper, diploma with a stamp, and that's called a certificate. Basically, this is the way it works. And after that, the company can claim, I passed the certification, please buy my product. So that's the way. This is the way it goes. So so for the moment, for biometrics, there are just there are actually, I know 3 certification schemes. There are also common criteria, but actually is not that used compared to the others, FIDO and the one from Android.
Thanks very much for the clarification. Irmak, would you like to react, perhaps? There's one question in the chat to which we will come in a few seconds, but perhaps brief reaction from you, Irmak, if you have any.
I will again make a reference, GDPR Article 42 about certification process. It might be a relief maybe for companies to have something which ensures that they have taken enough safeguards and security measures, but at the same time, the article says that, yes, but just because you have the certification doesn't mean that you really abided by GDPR. So it's very important maybe to ease the companies about what to do and how to take safeguards, but at the same time, it is inevitable that all the people who are data processing, all the engineers and everyone will have to know all the GDPR principles or its Swiss data protection or regulated other regulations. So in this case, it wouldn't prevent them from being responsible.
Thanks very much, Sérgio. Any reaction?
Oh, from my side, no further comments. I think we can move to the question that is on the chat.
I don't know, Sébastien, if you can see it in the chat.
I see. I can read it. Slide 20, which is on the screen now, or was on the screen now. I can put it again. So here. So question is, shows the use of face as a form of deepfake. Actually, it's not really a deepfake here, but are you aware of any other modality being used and failing a recognition system like voice? So first point, this is not the deepfake here, this is a presentation attack. Performed are just with a presentation attack instrument, which is a piece of paper with a face printed on a piece of paper. A deepfake is a digital modification of the video, of the content of video media. So like an image, if I would have an image with a face modified or video with a face modified that I will display or replay on the screen, that will be a deepfake displayed or replayed on the screen. First element of clarification. Second question is, other examples of modalities that can be spoofed? Yes. Voice? Yes. Fingerprint? Yes, of course. Vein recognition? Yes, it can. More complicated because it's more difficult to get a vein structure to steal them. But if you manage to steal or it leaks from a data set, then you could make a presentation attack. So in principle, any biometric can be spoofed. It's just a matter of time and money to create a presentation attacks to spoof the biometrics. So for instance, if you take something very complicated to spoof, the threat is probably much less than something which is easy to spoof, like face. So I hope this answers the question.
Yes, it does. Any last question? We are almost reaching the time limit of our session. It was an extremely interesting and also extremely intensive session, but last chance is offered to all of you to intervene. So if there are no further questions, so we're really taking away a lot of food for thought, and I was trying perhaps to change my own picture in the Zoom application to try to create a deep fake, which I haven't managed to do. But
send me a picture. I can see what I can do.
So we'll do for the next edition. In any event, many thanks to you, Sébastien, Marcel, for the great presentation.
Thank you, Jacques.
Both of you, Irmak, Erdoğan, Branco, for the great comments, and to all for your participation. Many thanks also to Amir Joseph, who is managing the AITPT sessions. And looking forward to seeing you at the next edition of AITPT that we will be organizing in January, and we'll get back to you on that front very soon. So thanks very much to all, and wishing you a good rest of the day. And perhaps for us speakers and commentators, we can just go to the breakout room, and to all of you otherwise, wishing you all the best, and many thanks again to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.